Okay. Morning. We are at our normal 8 o'clock hour. Oh, here we go. Now we do it. Thank you. Your timing is excellent, Chad. Okay, so I'm going to acknowledge that we're ready to go with the forum, and we're going to proceed with our guest speaker rather than through our pre-printed agenda. In addition to being our current council president, representing Council District 4, our council president, she is also chair of our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee and chair of our Audit Committee. And before being elected to our council in 2022, she was mayor of Tacoma Park. And before that, even on Tacoma Park City Council. So we have somebody here who's prepared to answer virtually every question we can ask, right?
Or I know who can, if I can.
So I'm going to let you go ahead. Just to refresh you, this group has been sitting together as the Charter Commission since July of 2023. And so we've already filed our first report, and we are in the progress to head towards filing our second report in about 10 months, I believe. So I will let you go ahead and give us any remarks you have first before we open it up for questions and answers.
Great. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is serving on the Charter Review Committee. It's so important to have a group of dedicated people who are really willing to dig into our charter, think about really the foundation of how our government is running, and look at how we can improve it. I very much appreciated the first report you all did, and I thought we had some excellent conversations on council. It was an incredibly thorough report and very helpful to us. I'm looking forward to your next report. I take seriously when we change our charter, and I think, as I said last year when we were reviewing your first report, making sure that any changes we make to the charter follow the goals of making sure that our government is working for our residents, is working towards being ever more transparent and accountable to our county residents, and any changes that we do make or look towards making are also communicated in a way that's understandable for our residents, because this stuff can get very much in the weeds. And I think for our government, and we're seeing this at a national level, to run well and continue to have the trust and support of our residents, it's important that we're communicating with them about what our guiding principles are, and what is in our charter, and why we do things the way we do. And so I just really appreciate the work you all have been doing, because I think have really been helping us advance that work. So I'm just happy to have the conversation with you all today.
Well, I found this to be a very serious group. No matter what the issue is, they take it very seriously. So it's a pleasure to work with them. So let me start with a couple quick questions. You're probably aware that there's already a ballot initiative petition circulating.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a particularly surprising one, because it carries the same theme as we've had ballot questions probably for the last 10 or 20 years. But it would limit operating budget increases to just the amount of inflation unless you get a unanimous council vote. So this group is aware of it, and we determined at a previous meeting that when the time is right, we will take it up for consideration. Mm-hmm. Now, we're in the habit of giving recommendations to the council, and ballot petitions, obviously, the council doesn't really get to vote them up or down. They just get put on if they get the signatures. But I think we're committed to providing our analysis and recommendations as a public service to voters, and to folks who watch the council hearings when we testify, so that they have some idea of what at least we consider to be the pros and cons. We think that's part of our obligation, even if the council isn't able to do anything about it. I found what happened last time is that we hear from the council what their input on that is, after we file our report and when I testify.
Mhm.
In this case, I'm wondering whether or not it would be helpful, and I think it would be helpful to this group to hear from council members, if not collectively, individually, as to what they think the pros and cons are of that proposal before we write our report.
Mhm.
So that we can include that as part of our analysis. And then there may be more than one view on the council, because I think on the budget issue we had last year, it was a council split vote of 6-5. So I mean, I understand that not everyone's gonna see it the same way. But I guess we welcome your thoughts on any way we can make that happen, or I don't know whether there's something you can do at your end, or whether you just wanna come back yourself at some point. But we would like to, facilitate some sort of dialogue between us and the council on that issue. And if folks want to do that privately and individually rather than, in a public way through this commission, then, fine. Some of us will benefit that way too. So anything you think would work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent idea of connecting with council members. And I would also say, I would highly suggest also connecting with county staff, council staff, as well as staff in the county exec's office and the finance department and OMB, to also gather their opinions. There's a couple of things I'll say just right now about this. At this time, we don't have the language. There's a petition circulating, and as you all know full well, when we're talking about ballot initiatives and other things, the details in the wording of things. I think having for the Charter Review Commission, one of the things that I think would be really helpful is to make sure, if you all have any questions about what we do now on the council, how we look at, our budget process, and, for example, we have a pretty robust discussion of our spending affordability guidelines that happens, and we actually set those every February before we're going into our budget discussions. And that's laid out in our charter already. We look at a number of indicators, not just inflation. Because when we're thinking about our economy, there's a lot of different pieces that we want to take into consideration as we're thinking about where we are as a county moving forward. And we have those conversations, and we actually take votes on what our spending affordability guidelines are going to be before we start our budget process. And those set then guidelines and triggers for how many people need to vote on the budget each year. And I'm happy to share, that first comes to government operations and fiscal policy, but then it's something the full council needs to vote on before early February. So even before we receive the budget from the county executive, we're setting these spending affordability guidelines. And I will say, when people say, oh, tie this to inflation, quite frankly, I have a lot of questions, because there are multiple measurements of inflation. There isn't just one measurement of it. And this is something I actually started digging in deep when I was the mayor in Tacoma Park, because we know that when we're looking at our local government, so much of our budget is people, is our personnel. And there is a measure of inflation called the ECI, the Employment Cost Index, and that looks at how much it costs employers to hire and retain employees. And we can look at that for local governments. And lots of times that measure is a bit different than the Consumer Price Index. So like right now, for example, the ECI, I believe, is around, the last time I looked, earlier in the spring when we started doing the budget, at 3.6%, where the CIP is at 2.4%. And so while with CIP is at 2.4%, when we're considering how much it costs to have our people, to hire them and keep them and have competitive rate wages, that's at 3.6. So you could, there's, and these are things that we take into consideration as we're looking at the spending affordability guidelines. So we're looking at all these different measurements. We're looking at what projections on income, unemployment, and we have this conversation to then say, okay, this is what we should put as the ceiling as our aggregate operating budget. So that's just to say that as we're considering this ballot initiative, I think it's really important to ground ourselves in the work that we already do in the county and on the council, and what is already specified in our code and charter on how we kind of set our guidelines before we go into the budget. And also understanding that there are multiple measurements of how we look at what our economic indicators are in the county, and how how robust they are and what we're doing well on, or where we may be lagging. In particular, as we see the impacts of the federal government right now and what they're doing, and what's happening to our local workforce, and so many people in the federal government who are losing jobs or being laid off. I would imagine over the next few years, we're going to see our projections on our income revenue drop. And we need to take that into consideration as we're also looking at what might be, because of the tariffs and other things, increases in inflation. So, there's a lot of pulls and takes when you look at a budget. Makes me a little nervous just to say we're going to take this indicator and set, like in our charter, something that is just one measurement. And so that.
And I have recently obtained a copy of the amendment language that came from the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections has already given approval to, they submitted their petition in advance saying, can we get the advance approval before we start getting signatures? And they did get that approval relatively recently. So I think we do have that language. But you're right. And what's interesting is the charter currently uses a different CPI. They're proposing to change which CPI they look at. I think the current one is the Baltimore, Washington area, and they would switch it to something that's like DC and Arlington or something.
Yeah.
Which with no explanation of why that's a better CPI. But I think the point you're raising is a good one, which is CPI, no matter which index you pick, may not be the right measure. You're looking more at affordability rather than just what's going on with prices. And affordability can change from economic growth. It could change from the increase in the tax base. Something may be affordable, whether or not it's tied to CPI or not. If the economics suggest either up or down, that you're going to have more or less tax revenue. So.
Yeah, I think it's having a more robust conversation is important. And as again, the times we're living in, there's so many factors and things that are pulling at us locally here that I think we need to be able to consider all those as we're looking at our budgets.
So it also suggests that as you take a look at this, you may come up with an alternative that may be a better way. In other words, if people think that we could do a change to the charter that would make more sense than the one that's being proposed, maybe there's an alternative that captures affordability in a different way, that suggests there's a better amendment rather than accepting what's currently in the charter. So, does anybody else have anything they want to add on this topic?
Yeah, I have a question. Has bond counsel weighed in, or will bond counsel be weighing in so far as the impact on our bond rating with Standard and Poor's and Moody's? Any ballot question?
That's a good question, Howard. I don't believe they do. I think they can be requested. That's a good question for Mike Covey over in finance. I know we can, when I've worked on different legislation and things, I've asked for a review by bond counsel to weigh in. So I think we could ask, but that's a good question for Mike Covey.
Good. Thank you.
our director of finance. Yeah.
Thanks. If there's any, if there's a question and any answer or comment, I'd be interested in that, and I think maybe colleagues.
Yeah, and I think as we're getting into like this and other things, as I said before, in addition to talking to council members, talking to the council staff, Mike Coveyou, Director of Finance, or OMB folks, because they're the one in the weeds on this stuff. They're the they're the ones who are putting together, pulling the budgets, looking at it, have worked for the county for a very long time, many of them, and so I think they have seen over the years, what works well and what sometimes can be obstacles to actually setting good policy. So sometimes when you say, oh, like we need a unanimous vote from the council to do something, that can actually be a real obstacle to putting in place good policy or making some really tough decisions that we need to make. And right now, we need to make some very tough decisions. And we hope we can come together and all do that together. Sometimes you can't.
Right. If it has to be unanimous, one member has a veto.
Right, exactly. And is that what we want? Like how our government to run? That's, one person can kind of, hold everybody else kind of, stop us from moving forward in making some really tough decisions that we're probably going to need to make as we weather the storm that's coming from the federal government and looking at the fiscal issues that we have at the state.
Well, a real cynic would say that's the purpose of the amendment, is to put a roadblock in the way of the council. And maybe, one of the ideas is that's used as a wedge to get voters to vote a certain way on the ballot for council members when they're voting for the amendment up and down at the same time. So,
yeah.
Before we go on to the next topic, anybody else have anything they want to talk about on the budget side? We have another issue that's sort of related, and that's the issue of the reserves or surplus, which a few of our members have wanted to take a look at. In the charter itself, there is a 5% cap on reserves for the general fund, but we've come to the understanding that for good reasons after the economic crisis, the bond rating agencies as well as the council have decided to increase the county surplus, so it's closer to 11+%, even though it's not in the reserves that are in the general fund, which are limited to 5%. And so one of the questions that's come to mind is whether or not the council thinks it would make sense to restructure the way that provision is in the charter to reflect that the council has greater flexibility to exceed that 5% cap than it's currently provided. Now, whether or not the way it's been structured now has been to get around the cap in the charter, or whether it's been perceived to be structured in a way that actually is most beneficial, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think this is actually something that well, there's a couple of things, and it's reserves are a bit complicated, and I will describe it. But I think again, if you all want to, you really dig in deep on this, we could bring together a number of folks to talk about this issue. So there are things, as you said, in our charter that talk about the reserves. In addition to that, we have a reserve policy. And we actually just received a report this spring that the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee is going to be taking up, looking at recommendations on updating our reserve policy. So while I think it's important to have certain things in our charter, I believe reserve policies and how we're looking at them are best done and provide the flexibility of having something that we can revisit over time, every maybe 3 to 5 years, where we are and to set the goals. Again, as we were talking about before, looking at multiple different factors is important as we're thinking about a reserve policy. In addition to that, there are things where the general accounting principles that we're under sometimes change. And so we want to make sure that if we need to adjust to different accounting guidelines and protocols, that we look at that also with our reserve policy and other factors. Right now, there are the important thing, and this is why it gets really complicated, is there's actually two sources of reserves that we look at. There's the undesignated general funds and then the revenue stabilization fund. And our fiscal policy that we have at the moment talks about having a reserve level where all of that is combined at 10%. So that's what we consider when we're looking at the budget. This year, we just passed a budget that is at 11.2% reserves. So in the charter, section 310 of the charter, it refers to the undesignated general fund portion of the county reserves. And that's the part that's restricted to 5% of the tax revenue from the prior year. And so then this was adopted so that we wouldn't have a lot of tax revenues kind of sitting in reserves. So that's that portion of the undesignated general fund. And then the second portion is the revenue stabilization funds, the RSF. And this is authorized in Chapter 20 of the county code, and there's no limit on the total amount that can be in this reserve. That's like our rainy day fund. And when we're thinking about, like, when we were under COVID or right now, when we're doing the budget, lots of times we want, as we're doing it, again, thinking about the conversation we had before, before we even get into the budget, we're thinking about, okay, what are the economic indicators? Where are things? What do we feel comfortable with in keeping in reserves that we may have to draw on because of unknown situations as we're moving forward? And so we had those conversations in this budget, given a great deal of unknowns coming from the federal government. The large majority of the council said we don't feel comfortable going to just 10% because that's what our policy says is kind of our goal to keep there. But we wanted to have a cushion so that we're able to draw down on that when we need to throughout the year. And the important thing is to know that when we're thinking about reserves, we really need to think about them as one-time funding. So this is not like an ongoing source of funding. So as we're budgeting and thinking about the money, where we have to be really careful, and this comes into like when we're talking about the schools and other things, not to use that money as we're budgeting to pay for ongoing costs that we're going to have year over year, because that's just one-time money. And so sometimes we use that money for capital projects or something that we know is a one-time source. So right now, we have those two sources, and right now, the undesignated general fund, the one that is supposed to be, capped at the 5%, is about 70 million, or about 1% of the reserves. So we actually rarely get close to that 5% cap. We really hold most of our reserves in the rainy day fund. So I would say, we have a reserve policy. It's something that, again, we look at periodically. The Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee is going to be taking that up again starting this summer and probably into the fall. My experience with this becomes really important when we're talking to our rating agencies. And in my experience, one of the things the rating agencies want to make sure is that you have a well thought out policy and that you're following that policy. And we have consistently had a reserve policy that we have followed. And those are the questions that we get from the rating agencies.
My personal thought was that, yes, it makes more sense to have this done through well thought out policy. And the question is whether or not that policy could be better thought out if the council had more flexibility based on how the charter, what the charter says. If in going forward, Tom says, well, we do it this way, we would do it a different way, but based on the way the charter structures, this is what it tells us makes the most sense. I think this group would consider, recommending more flexibility in the charter so that there's more flexibility in how you create your well thought out policy.
I don't think we need more. We're not feeling the need for more flexibility, I guess is what I'm saying. We feel like what we have set up in the charter and our code and the way we do it is, we're not, and I think it's important that we go through the report and the recommendations on what are best practices right now regarding reserve policies, and do that process before proposing changes in the reserve policy in the code or the charter. Because I would just want to make sure everything, it all meshes with best practices. And so at this time, from just the practice and having gone through our budget now for a third time, I'm not feeling the need for more flexibility and the need to change the charter in this respect. And as we're going through the reserve policy, if there is anything that comes up in those discussions, I think we can revisit that. But I have not experienced the need for more flexibility in this respect.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to ask Jeff specifically, since this is a topic near and dear to his heart. Is there anything on this you want to bring up?
No, it's a different perspective than I've seen. I did go through all the material that you sent, Jim, so that was fun. I guess I'm wondering why we need a charter provision at all on this. If the policy is working and the policy is really dictating that almost everything is coming not through those undesignated general fund revenues, maybe we don't need a charter provision at all. Maybe that's the answer here, is to provide that greater flexibility by not having that charter provision. Although if you're not coming close to the 5% each year, maybe it's a moot point. We'll have to take a look at that. So my thing is, having worked in local government for most of my life before my current iteration, it was always our best practice to have 2 or 3 months of reserves set aside to make sure that if I worked in Florida, a hurricane comes, knocks you out of business for a couple of months, you better be able to survive while you get yourself back up and running. And so looking at the 5% cap was like, okay, that's not going to fly. That's not a good way to manage your reserves for emergencies. And then we started getting information on the RSF and started getting information on all these other things. And so you've got really 3 different reserve stuff going on all at the same time, and maybe consolidating that into one policy, not a charter, not, other stuff. Maybe that's the answer. I'll have to take a look at it a little closer at this point now. So.
Yeah. And Jeff, I think that, to be honest with you, I looked at this report before we started budget from the consultants on the recommendations on the reserve policy, and I need to, and then we did budget and my brain was all on it. But I need to go back and look at it. But I think part of the recommendations is exactly where you're going.
Right.
Is why are we making our lives more difficult by having these different buckets? And is there something on the restructuring of it? So I definitely think that's a direction we can go in. But again, I think it's policy driven and something that we can revisit versus, doing something in the charter that makes it a little harder for us to then react to, as I said before, changes that we may want to react to in our from a policy perspective. And I think the uh, you don't look at reserve policies every year. That's
Mhm.
something that you look at. And the thing that keeps us sort of I don't want to say honest on this, but like keeps us needing to be really serious about our reserve policy is how tied it is to our bond rating. So, it's like, so I don't think there's a need to do it as a chart, like really dig into the charter on reserves and have it there, but have a really strong reserve policy that the rating agencies can look at, say, this is a strong reserve policy, you're sticking to it. And the other wrinkle in all this is that the different rating agencies will change how they are looking at us. And so, and that's actually also part, if I remember correctly from me a few months ago, part of this report is also thinking about some of the changes the rating agencies have made in how they're scoring us. So having that flexibility is also important.
I was just gonna say flexibility seems to me to be the issue here as much as anything else, so.
Yeah.
I see David has his hand raised, so I'm gonna ask David what his question is.
Yeah, I'm on the board of a condominium here, and we spend quite a bit of time talking about reserves because the state of Maryland passed a law that requires condominiums to maintain reserves at 100% of whatever the reserve study indicates is necessary to replace their capital property as part of the ongoing renewal of the property. The law was a result of the fact that a condominium collapsed in Florida
Yeah.
years ago. And then states all across the country got a little bit more serious about requiring private entities to maintain reserves. And I'm wondering how that does not apply to the county and the fact that the county owns a lot of property which could be damaged by a hurricane, a tornado, earthquake. Even though the odds are low, the possibility is there. And is the rainy day fund sufficient to take care of replacing a school or the county building or some other structure that the county owns and maintains?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that goes, I mean, it kind of goes to the point Jeff was making before is doing the analysis, saying what your what your percentage should be set at. And this is actually something in the report that we'll be taking up. A few years ago when we had the report, the recommendation was to set it at 10%. I think in this report, if I remember correctly, they're actually recommending that we look at, I think, something closer to 13%. Don't hold me to that because again, I looked at this report before budget, but it is not ratcheting it up a little bit. And so that's something we have to discuss, like the pros and cons of that, right? Because you can say, like David, as you're saying, the important thing about reserves is keeping money there so that we can react to situations. But at the same time, you don't want to bank so much of our taxpayer dollars that then we're not using it to provide the services that we're supposed to provide. So it's having that conversation of where's that sweet spot of having a rainy day fund, preparing for a worst case scenario, but not doing it so much that we are actually tying up taxpayer money and not providing the services we need to provide, or raising taxes to an extent that is not useful for our families or our economy overall. So that's why I go back to, these are conversations that we need to be having every couple of years while we're setting our reserve policy versus having it in the charter, which is much harder to change because situations change. And that's exactly the conversation we're going to be having on government operations and fiscal policy starting this summer, and really digging into, okay, given where we are, do we need to look at increasing that our reserve policy from a policy of now 10%, combining all of them to, 13% or 15%. And then that's something that just like when we went to 10% here in the county, it's not something you do overnight necessarily. It's something you plan for and you say, okay, we're going to plan to hit our goal over time. And so that, again, that is what we're going to be kind of looking at this summer.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing is that in the past, you've been able to rely on FEMA, and that was a result of a disaster. The current administration is not quite so generous.
Right.
And, so that I'm not sure that will continue with the next administration. I hope not. I hope that administration gets here soon. But at least for the next 3 years, you have a potential of not being funded by FEMA when a disaster strikes. And how that figures into your calculations.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was one of the reasons why we kept we wanted reserves at 11.2% this year, not to go down to the 10%. We also do have our CIP, our capital improvements budget that we have. And, there would always be the possibility of, if a disaster did happen and we needed to do it, is reprioritize projects there. I don't, not to, hopefully this would never happen, but if we did have something like your example of a school, if we did have a school, destroyed for some reason in some kind of weather event or emergency, you could say like, let's rebuild the school before we start construction on that brand new school we thought. So like there's, within thinking about our capital improvements budget, we can also go in there and look at reprioritizing projects as well. And I will say that we have already started in the last 2 budgets to realize that there's also a change in thinking about emergency services at the federal level. Quite frankly, we saw this shift start under the Biden administration, where we had grants that we've had for, gosh, if not a decade longer, that were funding positions that we had in our emergency management division. And, I think that and what we did in last year's budget, because these positions are so critical, these are our, emergency responders. And so when we have a fire or something else, these are the people who are on the ground, getting people, coordinating with the Red Cross, getting people the services they need. We have to keep those people in the county. And so we just added them and now funding them through our operating budget. And I think that there were a number of positions last year, and then this year there were deeper cuts. And so we did the same thing. And so there's sort of a shift in thinking at the federal level that where before the idea was that the federal government funded and provided funding through grants and other things for emergency response. And then that was the responsibility of the localities to actually do that response and have a coordinated effort. Unfortunately, like with a number of things, more of that's getting pushed back down to us at the local level to fund. So, we're already in the process of trying to adjust to that reality.
Having had some experience working with those people, I think you've done a good job of hiring.
They're awesome. I can't say like they're amazing, amazing people. Yeah.
We have a commissioner who's in a different continent this morning, 6 time zones away. But he had a suggestion, and I'm not sure I'll do it justice, but it's less of a question and more of a suggestion. I thought I'd act as proxy, at least to put it on the table. As I understand it, the council has formed a work group that consists of, I guess, county officials or county employees that is studying strategies for funding infrastructure improvements.
Mhm.
And he was wondering whether or not that group or some representative of that group might talk to us, or they might have us talk to them about whether or not there's any role for the charter in helping develop improvements in infrastructure funding. He just wants to make sure that we're considering whether or not the charter plays any role in that, or whether or not there's anything we can do to recommend that would help that sort of strategy making process along.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So the group is hasn't gotten up not to say we put everything on hold when we're doing budget in the county, but for our staff, it's kind of hard for them to undertake other things as we're doing budget. So the work group is just kind of getting up and started. It does have representatives of our county staff, park and planning, MCPS, as well as folks in the development community. I would say that on our, if you're interacting with some folks on our staff, our attorney, Miss Nadeau, is the point person to speak to, but I think that would be really helpful to talk to her. And the infrastructure that we're looking at is specifically transportation, schools, and parks. Because this grew out of our conversation last fall on impact taxes and our growth and infrastructure policy. And impact taxes go to fund our schools and transportation projects, part of those budgets. And we added parks to that as well. That's kind of the framework of the group, just to make sure it's not we went back and forth on how expansive. So it's not, I mean, infrastructure includes stormwater, a lot of other things. But this was really looking at right now, when we're thinking about new development, the way that we have, for lack of a better way of saying it, a shorthand, new development pay for, and making sure we have the infrastructure in place to support that in terms of transportation and schools. We have our impact taxes, and we know they're not actually really doing what we intend them to do. And so that was the outgrowth of this work group. But yeah, I think that would be a great idea to talk to them, and I would connect with Miss Nadeau on that as the staff person who is helping to coordinate that effort.
I'm going to open it up now for any and all other questions that folks may have.
Yeah, I've got a question. I imagine the status of the water pipes are extremely important in this entire area, and that we have to coordinate with the WSSC to make sure that we have fresh water coming in and the refuse going out. And it's unclear to me how much we pay when the streets are torn up as they have to be. But I imagine that plays a key role, whether it's new development or old development. Some of the pipes have been there for a long time, and it requires constant work. So I guess there's a lot of coordination with WSSC.
Yeah, we actually oversee, like, that comes to the council as well, looking at their budget. We have many meetings with WSSC looking at their CIP budget, their operating budget. And we, along with, because it's a BICO effort between Prince George's and Montgomery County, what we do each budget year is also establish the rate that WSSC charges. And that was actually a big conversation this year because of the need, Howard, as you're talking about like the infrastructure, the pipes and everything. And we in Montgomery County, we were looking at having that rate increase be a little higher than what Prince George's wanted. And so we had to kind of go back and forth on that, and a number of us on the council, myself, council member Balcom and others felt really strongly that we need to make sure that we're making the investment in the infrastructure for WFSSC because this is clean water and sewage. Like we can't mess around with this. And it's, WSSC's budget, it's as because it's mostly based on the rates that they are able to charge with water consumption decreasing, which is a good thing because we're conserving more water. That actually means their revenues are decreasing. And so how do they continue with a very old system in many places in our county, maintaining that as their revenues are dropping. And so it's really interesting actually. They've done some really good presentations for us, and I think one of the things that was also telling is one of the things they presented is the rate we pay here in Montgomery County and Prince George's compared to other places around the country,
Right, so you
and
put
how much that has increased.
so we want people to conserve water, but if they use less water, there's less money
Yeah.
coming in. So that's where you have to work collaboratively.
Yeah, and it's kind of tricky because like we have to set the same rate, like we have to work with Prince George's. And so it's not just our decision here in
Right.
Montgomery County.
And I'm just wondering, overall with the budget, do we have a rough cut percentage as to what can be considered mandated in the budget and what is discretionary in terms of an overall percentage? In other words, how much flexibility does the council have over the budget in terms of a percentage, if it's possible to put a number to that?
Hmm.
In other words, you have to pay the interest on the debt. There's certain things.
Right. I guess it would be I'm gonna say everyone may define like what they see as um discretionary versus mandatory in a different way. I think the way one of the things that we do early on in the budget is look at compensation of our workforce. And we do that early on in the process because once we agree to that, not just our union contracts, but setting wage increases for all of our employees, that's a huge chunk of our budget. So, once that decision is made, moving forward, we're not looking at like that much leeway. And then if you take into consideration the schools, now you could say for the schools, right, we have the state law and maintenance of effort, and that's mandatory, right? And so, but it depends on who you talk about. If anything over that, if they would consider that discretionary or what we need to do, in particular when it's additional money to cover teacher, educator contracts and staff contracts. So it's hard to put a percentage on that. And I think one of the things that we've been doing on the council is not just looking at over the last couple of years what is new spending in the budget, but when we're not deep in active budget conversations, doing deeper dives into each of the departments' base budgets so that the council really understands what is already in the base budgets because we don't have time to completely review every department during the short amount of time we have to review the budget every year. So last year we did a deep dive in MCPS's budget, and we had 3 full council sessions that looked specifically at contracts, health benefits, consultant costs, other drivers of MCPS's budget so that we could really understand at a deeper level what was in that budget because they're such a huge part of our county budget. In the next couple of weeks, I'm getting a proposal from the staff that I'll bring to the full council on what's the next department or departments that we will be doing that deep dive in over the next couple of months before we get to our budget season starting in the spring. And so putting this into practice, what we're hoping to do is look deeper into to the base budgets, like and, you know, do we need to kind of question and think about some of the practices and some of the things that we've been funding for years? Do we take another look at those and say, like, is it time to rethink this?
Right, and you said before that we meet with the Standard and Poor's and Moody's periodically. Are those meetings in person or are they remote, or how do it used to be that I think
Yeah.
go to New York, but then with the pandemic it was all remote. What is it now?
So the last 2 years it's been remote. It's usually the end of August, early September, we've had those meetings. I did, you know, Mike Covey did mention to me the other day that he thought it might be good to propose doing something in the near future where we do them in person again. But I'd have to get to back with Mike and find out. But for the last couple of years, those have been because I've been on them as whether or not I was president or vice president, as chair of government operations. I get to be in those meetings with the rating agencies, and they've been remote for the last couple of years.
I always felt it was better in establishing a rapport if you could meet in person, even though one person has to go where the other person is, or vice versa, or alternate it. But that might be helpful.
Yeah, we have a really good, I will say, we have, I think, you know, we have my experience being on these calls and things is, I agree every now and then doing them in person is a good thing, especially when you get a new analyst assigned to you. But I think our staff does a great job, and the meetings, as we've seen, we hold on, and we just need to hold on with everybody else around us kind of dropping. We're gonna try really hard to hold on again this year.
That's really helpful. It's really great for you to meet with us, by the way, like this. And really, I mean it. It's very, very helpful and appreciated a lot. In the material we got for this meeting, and I think this might also be for the July meeting, the language here, the response from finance says the council and the executive will work collaboratively to identify targeted reductions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of a definition or standard for collaboratively. Does it that you call up and say, what do you think? And let me
Yeah.
know if you have any opinions or what? Is there, is there a process for working collaboratively between the executive and the council to come
She needs to
agree
wrap
on
up.
this?
Yeah, so I think you know, I will. This was a very. I think this past budget cycle was a really tough budget for a number of reasons, given um, the lack of information, and you know, last minute things coming out of Annapolis and other things. And I would say, and you know, this would be a good thing to ask some of the staff in the county exec's office. I do believe we worked really collaboratively to look at the budgets and to have a process in which you know, we made reductions in the budget this year from what the county exec sent over to us. And from my perspective, and I hope the department heads feel the same way, we did that in a way that was collaboratively with them. I can tell you as chair of government operations and fiscal policy, one of the I'll just give you one example. The Department of TEBS, our technology, our IT department, comes to our committee, and one of the things we asked them to do in committee was to go back on a number of their requests for the budget and really look at could we reduce them. You know, they had proposals on looking at AI and other things, and they came back with a number of reductions and said, you know, this year we could do without this, we could do without that. And there are a number of other departments that said, we understand, you know, they put together their budgets and their requests, and the county executive gives that to us in March. And it became clear between March and when we were making final decisions, you know, late April, early May, how dire everything is really looking right now. And we had more information from the state. So our departments were, you know, really helpful in rethinking some of the requests and how we could, look at stretching things out over different fiscal years, or, putting something on hold and maybe coming back to it mid-year when we see, when we have some more of these indicators on how the economy is going to go. Nancy Feldman at OMB, is doing a great job. And, we'll know more later in the fall on some of the projections on revenue on income tax, employment, and other things to get a better handle on what we think we're looking at. And so at that point, we can reassess, some of these programs that we weren't able to get in the budget this year. Do we come back to them? We'll also know what's happening at the federal level, because honestly, if some of this stuff goes through with Medicaid cuts to SNAP and other things, that's going to be devastating for us.
Boy, that's a
So,
real, thank you.
Okay, so I understand you have another appointment coming up in a few minutes,
yeah.
and I'm gonna say thank you and let you go.
All right. Well, thank you all. And yeah, I'm happy to come back. And as again, and if you have more questions, like I said, we have amazing staff who can really get into some of the details on some of these other issues. So I'm just really glad you're all doing this, and I appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. It was so informative. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled agenda. Administratively, does anybody have anything they wanted to add to the agenda that was circulated?
Nope.
Not, we'll proceed with unanimous consent on the existing agenda. We have minutes from April 9th meeting that was circulated. Does anybody have anything they want to add to the April meeting agenda minutes that were circulated?
Thank you.
Okay, not hearing any objections, we will take the April minutes as being approved by unanimous consent. Okay, real quick, chair's report. I told you all in March that I had an opportunity to meet briefly with the Up County Citizens Advisory Board and the Mid County Citizens Advisory Board for the purpose of letting them know what our work is, what we do, and offering them the opportunity to weigh in with us either on topics of concern to them, or when we have our hearings on the topics of concern to us, to come back and testify on that. We had 3 other citizens advisory boards that we did not have those meetings with yet. But I'm here to report that I contacted all of them again, and 2 of them didn't get back to me, and 2 of them are interested in meeting with us. There's still the 5th one I haven't heard from, but I am scheduled to meet, and you are all welcome to attend the meeting of the West County Citizens Advisory Board on the evening of June 16th. Is it West County? I might be wrong on that, actually. No, it is West. It is the Western County one. They meet in person in Bethesda. They also have a hybrid option as we do. So I think if you just let me know, I will ask them to circulate the Zoom link for anybody who wants to attend by Zoom. And I have not yet decided whether I'm going to attend in person or by Zoom. So that's West County. East County is still looking for a date to accommodate our request. And it's the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board that we have not heard from yet. So again, the ultimate goal is to, when we finally take our issues and decide what we're going to put in our report and what our recommendations are going to be, when we're ready to do that, hopefully sometime in the fall, we will again do what we did last year, which is have a public hearing where anybody can testify. And I'm hoping to somehow work them into that process so that we hear from them directly on the very specific issues that we're raising.
Jim, who was East County again?
East County. I don't know how to define the geography on East County. I guess it's east of Silver Spring. But Burtonsville.
Okay.
And Burtonsville, I think, would be in there. Oh, I already mentioned the ballot initiatives. They do have their petition circulating now. They did get approval from the Board of Elections. They did make some changes to the wording based on what the Board of Elections suggested to them. They were going to tie the need for a budget increase to an economic emergency of some type, and they removed that. So the council would not need to find an economic emergency. They just, the unanimous vote by itself would be enough. I thought that was actually a positive improvement. And that is all I have on the chair's report. Anybody else have anything they want to ask? Okay, next on our agenda, I have listed here finance work group, and Mike is absent. And so if folks want to make any comments based on the conversation we had with President Stewart, that would be fine. I guess we're not going to have a official report. But if anybody wants to follow up on that conversation and supplement that, this would be the time. Okay, so we will come back to that topic next month when Mike can join us.
I just have one comment. I think it sounds like there's ongoing reevaluation of these kinds of things by the council themselves, which I didn't know whether that happened or not. So that's real positive.
Okay, budget reserves work group. Is there anything, Jeff, you want to raise at this time or discuss based on what the council president informed us?
No, I mean, she kind of confirmed what I had read and all that stuff. So no, David, by the way, I worked 10 years in that city where the building collapsed. So
Oh, is that?
I'm familiar with that building.
So,
In any event, no, I don't have anything else to add. I think that rather than modifying the charter provision, I think I'm leaning at this point towards maybe pulling it from the charter altogether. So, but we can talk about that as we move forward.
so let me suggest this is a timing matter. We know that with the council recess and staff vacations in August, this commission has historically recessed in August. So we will have our July meeting as usual, and then we won't meet again until September. And I know that you and Mike have both talked at various times about meeting with council staff after budget season was over, and budget season is now over. Do you think you could get with Mike and figure out, who on staff or, what kind of conversations you want to have with either in the executive branch or in the council staff, and maybe do that between now and our July meeting, or at least in July, so that either we're in a prepared to go forward with that information, either in July or September. My concern is we're going to have some sort of preliminary read on what we want to do in order to go out with a public hearing notice in the fall. And you get into holiday season in November, nobody wants to have those hearings. So I'm thinking, late October, early November would be the best time to have those hearings. And so I'm hoping that we can sort of move into the phase of this is what we recommend or propose, so that we can sort of get wrap our brain around that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I don't know whether Mike's people would be the same as my people, but whoever's kind of leading the charge on that report is kind of who I think we need to talk to as far as the reserve stuff goes. The recommendation for a higher percentage, whoever on staff is the one that report was, I guess, given to, or who directed it or dealt with the consultants, or however you want to put it, is probably who I would want to talk to from my end.
All right. So I will charge you and Mike with talking with Stephen or Christine if necessary, and figure out how to make that happen sometime in the next 30 to 45 days or so. How about that?
Okay.
Okay.
And Jim, I was going to offer the coordination from the executive side for Mike Coveyou, if or many other, or our OMB folks, if that's helpful for Jeff and Mike for people to talk to. So from the executive, let me know who you need to talk to when you want to talk.
Who on the executive level, our executive team, would be the one dealing with this kind of reserve stuff and the report that came out and all of that kind of stuff?
Mike will do the technical review. There is a political component to it, which is
Right.
not Mike.
Right.
That would be, that is Mark Elrich and in consultation with Rich Madalino.
Yeah, probably the technical is what I'm more interested in. I know the political stuff, but technically, if the lean is towards more flexibility, does removing the charter provision provide more flexibility, or does it just not do anything? Does it, is it a waste of time to be even having this conversation about a charter amendment? So
And flexibility might come more into OMB.
right.
As compared to actual finance, the technical workings of how the reserves are currently legally set up.
I'm open to either.
I mean, and both
Yeah.
are, we're certainly, Mike is extremely knowledgeable. I think that baseline would be helpful in order for you to decide whether to move forward with how you wish to move forward.
And our mic might need your mic for sure, I would guess. So
Okay.
thanks, Dale.
Thank you, Dale. I have on my list here next, staff updates. So is there anything the staff wants to tell us, or have we received any public comments in our public comment file?
Let me check the email box right now, but not as of earlier this week. We have not received anything.
Okay, that's good.
I don't have any other updates.
Just a quick to the question of what is East County. It goes from Four Corners at Colesville and Sligo, goes north through New Hampshire, Colesville and White Oak, all the way up through Burtonsville, Colesville, if then New Hampshire Avenue, Colesville, up to Ashton, Sandy Spring. That is East County.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks.
I knew Burtonsville was in there. Okay, this is open season now.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Christine Welland. I just wanted to ask, hi, if you would mind, and I apologize if you already did this and I missed it, but if you have the language that was approved by the Board of Elections, if you would be willing to circulate it.
I do have it. I got it in hard copy by putting a FOIA request in with the Board of Elections. And I will circulate it. Glad to do that.
Great, thank you so much.
This is open mic time. We have a couple more minutes before we have to adjourn. So anybody who has any topic they want to raise that we haven't covered yet this morning, now's the time.
If I may, I had hoped I'd be able to ask the council chair the question, which was her opinion on the existence of the Office of People's Counsel. Maryland has a People's Counsel that deals with residential utility issues, but that's its limited domain. And the proposal for a People's Counsel in Montgomery County was going to relate to zoning issues. And I've wondered why people can't just go to the department that handles zoning and ask questions and get things resolved by dealing with the staff there. But for some reason, that's been a persistent proposal from the executive, I think, county executive, to have a People's Counsel. I was curious to find out what her opinion was of that idea.
Well, I won't speculate, but since our council has refused to fund it for over a decade, I think that we're getting close to 2 decades. I mean, I don't think they think that it makes the process move smoother or faster. I think they just, it becomes a question of having it be more complicated. And that, we had on the hook the chair of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, who was going to come speak to us on this. And they have been the most vocal advocate for reinstating that office. And if you recall, we went through a couple of meetings where she was going to come and speak to us, with the permission of her board. And eventually she contacted us and said, you know what? We're dropping this. And if the most, if the most vocal advocate for it is dropping it, there has to be a good reason. And her reason was they determined that, based on, I guess, one or two court cases, that whatever they were trying to do with it to get this reinstated, it was going to take an act of the legislature, that they were better off focusing on whether or not they could have state legislative changes to do what they want, rather than require this to be a matter of charter change. That you could convince the council politically to change its votes, but as far as having a charter amendment, it would not be possible to achieve that goal through a charter amendment. So she didn't feel bringing it to our body made any sense.
All right, well, I was not at all in favor of it in the first place, so I'm glad to hear that's the result. But I did, I thought it was still a hanging issue for us. I'm glad to know that no
I
longer.
think when the advocates drew it from our consideration, we decided we had a consensus at that particular meeting that it didn't make sense for us to continue without an advocate.
All right, that.
Anybody got anything else? If not, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim. Great meeting. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.